Hello, my name is Yessica Holguin. Welcome to the first episode of The Wealth We Build, a show that uplifts the voices of community leaders, entrepreneurs, organizers, and institutional champions who are taking bold collective action to close the wealth gap. At a time when so many feel isolated or uncertain, this show is a powerful reminder that the real change is possible when we move together with a shared purpose. We not only have the power to reshape our economic future, we have the responsibility to build systems rooted in community ownership, dignity, and shared prosperity for generations to come. Thank you very much for being here. Really excited to be joined today by Michelle Sturm, Patrick Horvath, and Michael Miera, who are going to be sharing about the history of community wealth. So let's get started with our conversation. Let's talk a little bit about community wealth. For our viewers, what does that mean for you?
For me, community wealth, it makes a lot of common sense, and it's about when we have an economy that is designed to support people and communities, and we make our decisions and we create the structures that allow people to thrive and to have dignity and to be successful in this economy.
You know, I would certainly share that perspective. It is not necessarily about, as the name implies, individual wealth. And we get confused about that a lot of times. This is about groups and systems and communities, neighborhoods, larger societies, growing from within the wealth that they need to support themselves and to thrive in this world. And that requires systems change. That's not the way our current system is set up. So to me, community wealth means having the opportunities within your own community, regardless of how ostracized or disadvantaged or marginalized that community has been over time, to grow the resources and have access to the resources that you need for that community to be economically strong.
I don't have anything to say after that. To me, community wealth, well, I have to back up a little. Our economy is not fair and equitable as it is right now. And to me, community wealth is changing that. And like Patrick said, changing the system to make it more fair and equitable so that, that the communities have access to resources and can build wealth for themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think in so many ways, community wealth is about all of the resources, the assets that we have in community, if we can figure out how to use them in a different way. I think one of the things that's so exciting about community wealth is that it's not just about it's not just about economics. This is about community wealth in creating the conditions for our communities to thrive. However, it does start with economics, right? And so it's really important as we think about this journey, how we're building this movement in a way that starts with changing our economic systems, but not stopping there. And so how do we create that fabric and continue to strengthen the fabric of our communities? Because sometimes when our economic systems fail, it is our communities that are there to support this.
Yeah, and I would even say that, you know, one of the things that distinguishes community wealth building from the traditional economic system that we're all familiar with is the fact that it looks at collective economics. It looks like at the power of people to build economies together. In the U.S., so much of our economy is based on the myth of the self-made person who can just by the strength of their own character and the opportunity, you know, to build themselves up out of nothing. And that's just such a fallacy. And what we're focused on here is how do communities collectively support one another to change that narrative, because we know that narrative is just not accurate for so many people in our society.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the history of the organization, or what once was the Community Wealth Building Network. So Patrick, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's such an amazing story. Here we sit in 2026, about 8 years after the founding of the organization, but really 12 years after the seeding of this work that really began back in 2012. And at that time, I was working at the Denver Foundation, a local community foundation here, and we were looking at ways to advance economic opportunity in a new program area that we were developing. And we got approached by some folks who were starting an employee ownership center here in Denver. It was all volunteer. They wanted to get involved in creating worker-owned cooperatives at a larger scale in our community, and they were working with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, which already has had for decades, cooperatives in the agricultural sector in the Rocky Mountain region. And so they came to us and said, look, if you're doing economic opportunity, you have to include wealth building opportunities for communities that are farthest from opportunity. And so we began to look with them at ways that this was happening around the country, ways that it was starting to happen in Denver, and we were able to provide some early funding to help that group of volunteers to understand how worker ownership advanced community wealth, how working with large anchor institutions, healthcare and higher education institutions, to get them to spend their money differently could create strong local economies just by changing the way they use their purchasing power, to hire from local communities, and then also to engage with small businesses that have been left out of the economic mainstream, did not have access to the resources they needed to grow and to strengthen and to gain access to markets, and to work with them as well to help their communities grow stronger. So we began to experiment with that group, and we formed something called the Community Wealth Building Network, which is a precursor to this organization. And Michelle got involved pretty early on in that process, and maybe you can pick up some of that story.
I feel like you all went to Cleveland.
That's exactly right.
That's
exactly.
And also, I want to give a shout out to Dick Peterson, right,
Yeah.
and Bill Curtin from Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, and Larry Dunn.
Larry Dunn, that's right. So these three musketeers, they were helping to create. Dick had started the first worker-owned Remax franchise in the country, something which is no longer allowed by Remax. But he had been to Mondragon, Spain, the place where the largest, still to this day, largest worker-owned cooperative in the world exists. And he really wanted to see this advance. And so he was aware of other worker ownership centers around the country, and he wanted one in the Denver region. So he came to us and said, I want you guys to go to Mondragon, Spain. And we said, Dick, we can't go to Mondragon, Spain. Well, he said, let's go to Cleveland. I said, okay, we can go to Cleveland. So in February of 2013, we got a group of folks together. Denver Foundation was able to pay for some folks to go and visit one of the nascent community wealth building efforts that was happening in Cleveland. It was created and sort of formed by the Cleveland Foundation. We took sort of a delegation, the folks from Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, community residents, the folks from the group that Dick was forming, and we went and looked at the way the Cleveland Foundation was creating this opportunity. It was focused on, at that point, helping a bunch of large hospitals, healthcare, and higher education institutions in an area of Cleveland called the Greater University Circle to change the way they did business, because at that point, the communities around those very wealthy institutions had been hollowed out by the mortgage crisis. And so they were looking at ways to recreate and revivify those neighborhoods, bring economic vitality back to them. And so we went and visited. We saw how they created this thing called the Evergreen Cooperatives, a whole network of work-owned cooperatives to provide services to to sell things to the organizations that were part of that Greater University Circle initiative. And we came back with a lot of energy. And so I think that that was a time in which a lot of the foment for this started really hitting the ground in Denver, and we had some ideas then. And then we could start funding those ideas because we understood what it meant to create community wealth at that scale.
Thank you. I appreciate that background. So 2013 is when I first got introduced to what was happening here in Denver around community wealth building, and there was a small symposium that was held on the Auraria campus. And I attended that, and I remember, yes, this is very basic common sense of how do we rewrite our system and make it work for people and communities. And it was a very small group that was there, and it was definitely people that were in the industry, right? It was nonprofits, and it was foundations, and it was people that were
Eric,
working
right?
on it. Eric
Eric Renke.
Eric Renke organized this, and he was really behind a one-payer healthcare system in Colorado at the time, which was a big push, which did not pass on the ballot, unfortunately. And so the group, though, it was some really great conversation and some really great energy, and then I don't know if much was happening in between, but then the group decided, let's do this again in 2014. Let's put on a symposium again, but none of us sitting around the table really have capacity to do it. Let's bring in a contractor to help us put this on. And that's when I got lucky and said, I want to do that. I put in a bid for that project. And we put together a really exciting summit in 2014, a community wealth building summit.
It's a great gathering, yeah.
It was really focused on, this isn't just for the think tanks and the nonprofits and the policymakers. This is for community. Let's make this a really community engaged event. And so we had about 250 people there. We held it at the Anschutz Medical Campus. I remember that morning, and they were an early anchor institution at that point of thinking about how they could leverage their business
Campus
practice.
really was just starting to find its, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I got there early that morning, and we held it on a Saturday, so it was really accessible for community members to be there. We were told at the time, well, you're not going to get the nonprofits and the policymakers to come on a Saturday, and they were wrong, right? And it was a really exciting connection of people, that there were the people in the community that this was about. We had African interpretation, Eritrean language was interpretation at the time, Spanish speakers at the time for language translation, interpretation, as well as your typical nonprofits and community members. And I remember getting there about 6 o'clock to get set up for that conference, and I almost got arrested. I couldn't get into the building, and I almost got arrested. And I had to do the welcome that morning, and I remember just feeling like that was a really great omen, you all. We are doing some powerful stuff here. It felt a little bit subversive. We were not, it was subversive in terms of we're saying our system isn't working and we need to do it differently. And it just felt really, it was a very exciting start to a really powerful day.
Yeah. And I know that because that located there on East Colfax and Aurora, that got the attention of some folks in Aurora as well. And then not long after that, we put together another trip to Cleveland, but this time with the chancellor of the Anschutz campus and the chief officer there, and the mayor of Aurora, or the city manager, and a number of other folks who wanted to kind of understand, because this campus had been created in the midst of a neighborhood that was not doing very well. It was the former Army base, and so it had been truly cordoned off from the community. When the hospitals moved in there, it kind of retained that reputation for being apart from the community, even though it was injecting hundreds of millions of dollars of spending into that community. And so they got involved because they wanted to see if this notion of community wealth building would have any legs for economic development in the Aurora area. And I remember Don Elliman was the chancellor and Lily Marks was the big shot at the hospital who came with us. They both agreed to come, and they both told us later that when they were getting to the hotel in Cleveland, they looked at each other and said, what are we doing here? We have so much work to do. Our schedules are so busy. We're really taking 2.5 days to go to Cleveland? Well, by the next day, they were meeting with the heads of the Cleveland Clinic, talk about our prestigious organization in that greater University Circle area, and hearing about how they had to change the way they did their work. And they came back, and one of the first things that Lily said was, we've realized as a healthcare institution, we can't clinic our way out of the economic circumstances that we're finding in our neighborhood. We can't just keep providing free healthcare and saying to people, oh, come to our emergency room, or we'll create this clinic in the neighborhood so you don't have to come to our emergency room. We need to do things differently. And that, I think, was a real shot in the arm for how the institutional elements of the wealth building effort started in the region.
Of course, when I heard about the community wealth building, it fit right in with us trying to use our resources for low-income neighborhoods, low-income communities. So that's why I got so involved with Community Wealth Building Network, because it fit right into what we should be doing with the resources that the city gets from the federal government. And that was my involvement to begin with the network.
And it was great to have you there coming in through that route, because often cities start these things and they usually fail because they don't have connections to the grassroots, to the communities that they're supposed to be helping. But in this case, the organization had already started to form, and you were able to come in and see, hey, there's something here that the city of Denver should be involved with.
Yeah. Michael, can you talk a little bit about how this aligned with your personal values, because there's so much of what we do is about the individuals.
Right.
And for Michelle, it's something that you already believed in. So for you, it made sense. Patrick, for you, it made sense. Talk a little bit about your history and why this made sense for you.
Well, whenever I start talking about this, it goes back to my involvement in the Chicano movement. And in the Chicano movement, trying to uplift our communities. And Corky Gonzalez, who was head of that, he always talked about economics. You have to build economics in order to create self-determination for the Chicano community. And I saw this as exactly what I was involved in when I was with the Crusade for Justice and involved in the Chicano movement. So it fit in exactly with my values at the time.
It looks a little bit different now, but I think it's the same self-determination and
Yeah.
and truly bringing joy into what we do. I think oftentimes it's so, it can be scary to think about tackling an entire system. And yet if we can slice it a little bit, a smaller slice, then we can figure out how to make it work.
I wanted to add that, after that 2014 very successful day of like 250 people there, excited about this, and we realized there was a lot of energy in that room, and we had no plan for where are we going to take this, what's going to happen now, and that, I would say, was an organic group that had come together to organize that conference. Then said, okay, we need to see what's next. And even though there is no organization and there's no capacity here to do that, let's just see what we can do organically. And so we hosted our first sort of informal evening happy hour, time to come together as a group and see, well, who's going to come back to this and want to keep the conversation going. And I think there were about 60 people that came that night. And we formed into different sort of interest area groups. And out of that, we had a group that did a white paper around how to bring capital into cooperative
Yeah,
system.
crowdfunding research.
and other sort of capital pieces. And so that just kept evolving and morphing and bringing more people to the table and saying, okay, we've got to start having conversations on a regular basis so we understand what everybody's doing in this community and see where this is going to go.
Yeah,
right?
And then we entered sort of a planning period that felt a little bit like the desert. We were we met every month, I think it was, at least every month. It might have been more frequently, and tried to form that into something that had the strength to create a movement in the Denver area. And it did feel at some points like we were not making a lot of progress, but we didn't have a lot of funding to put on the table. And I recall at one time there was one other funder along with the Denver Foundation that was part of that group that was meeting regularly. And we came to all the meetings. Denver Foundation hosted most of them. We provided the lunch, et cetera, but it was small potatoes. And we asked the group at a certain point, myself and the other funder, what is it going to take to get this to the next level? Give us a whole plan. And the plan came back at $450,000.
Hold on. I want to say that the charge that we were given by the two funders, it was the Denver Foundation and Gary Community Ventures. They said, what's it going to take to shift the economic development paradigm in Metro Denver? So we're like, okay, that's to shift an economic development paradigm. But there's a lot of pieces here. So I want to say that the reason we pulled together a really large proposal was the question was, how are you going to do something really big? Right?
And I think what that communicated to us, no, that's absolutely fair, is that this was a really big project. And I don't think either of us had the institutional access to put that kind of money on the table. And so what we did instead was we moved towards a process that eventually led to what's now become the Center for Community Wealth, which you were very involved in.
And I want to add another piece too, that there was also a national organization, that the Democracy Collaborative, which was behind the Evergreen Cooperatives. They were a big player in that work, and they're important in this conversation around the country. There was also a consideration of potentially bringing them into the Denver area to run this project. And I was really proud of our group, which said, no, that is that is the antithesis of community wealth building, to bring a Washington, D.C. based think tank to come into Denver and figure this out. And in fact, even though they're doing a lot of great work, this is new stuff, and we need to figure it out here to make this sustainable.
It's not a cookie cutter.
It's not a consultant to come in and figure it out for us and write a nice paper and leave. Like, we really need to live, breathe, create, and do this at the community level. And so I think that was also a real big turning point and a real, for what happened here in Denver.
Yeah. Well, and what it did was call the question and say, look, there isn't going to be some sort of outside group that's going to come in and save the day. So now let's start this with a much more forward-looking, long-term commitment in terms of building what we needed as far as resources, in terms of on-the-ground organizational structure. Which, okay, so I jumped the gun a little bit there, but that then led to the decision to create a fellowship program, which you were very involved with.
That's right. We decided when we weren't going to get the $500,000 to really shift the economic development paradigm here, it was like, okay, we have enough money to create a fellowship. And the foundations also told us, and we want some more research, and we want some more, study more to see, is the economy,
what foundations do?
What's wrong with the economy, and do these ideas of really building within a community, do those resonate with people? Do other people feel like there's a movement here and there's some work to do? And so then we did a search process, and we were, amazing timing. Yessica, why don't you share about the timing from your perspective?
Yeah, this is fascinating, because I think there's moments in life when the universe tells you exactly where you need to be, and this was definitely one of them. In my work in Nicaragua, I focused on economic development, community-driven economic development, so very different than the way that the U.S. does economic development. And I think so much of how the organization was structured was really influenced by my experience abroad. And so I'm going to take you back to, I think it was February of 2017, when my partner and I had decided that we were going to come back to Denver. And I was still doing some technical assistance with small businesses. And one of the businesses in Nicaragua shared that the government was providing tax incentives to foreign-owned businesses that they were not extending to local-owned businesses. And I was like, well, that can't be possible. So I went home and I searched policy to build community wealth. And this job posting comes up. And so I'm like, oh, there's somebody already doing this. And I opened the posting, and then to my surprise, it was in Denver, Colorado. I was completely floored that this entity was doing this work in my own backyard. And so I remember opening up the job posting and reading. It was supposed to be a 1-year fellowship, and it was supposed to be pretty specific to study where the lowest hanging fruit was. And so I had been doing economic development work for 6 years. I was like, this is amazing. I'm going to take a stab at it. Mind you, I was in Nicaragua, in a place where, electricity would go out every once in a while, usually once or twice a week. Internet was always unstable. And but I took a chance, and I applied, and I was going to be a long shot. Had been out of the country for 6 years at that time. And so to my surprise, I get an interview, and I go through the whole process through Skype at that time, hoping that the internet would hold, and it did. And so I ended up coming back to the States in April of 2017, and I started the job May 1st. And in some ways, I think about the little gap that I had to reintroduce myself to the U.S., to get used to hot water. Sometimes that was a mistake, but in other times, I think it was a blessing, because I was able to create the process to capture community feedback in a way that was probably not influenced by U.S. systems. And so what I did was I come from a community organizing background, so I went straight to community members. I went straight to grassroots communities. And I was able to interview close to 400 people. I talked to pretty much everybody and anybody who would talk to me. I talked to community members, business owners. I talked to elected officials, organizational leaders, to try to figure it out. I had a pretty big sense of responsibility of I felt the pressure of having to do something in 1 year. And I came back to my neighborhood. I was raised in Denver. I was born in Mexico, but I was raised in Denver. And I came back to my neighborhood and everything was different. 6 years changed so much, the reality that I was coming back to a new city. And so the pressure and to see so many individuals being displaced because of gentrification added to that pressure even more. And so I was like, I need to figure this out. At that point, we were looking, the ask was broad. What do we need to do? What are the leverage points to increase economic opportunity? That was it. We were looking at everything and anything. And so we started with a very broad theory, included affordable housing, included financial education, included workforce development, included business development. And then of course I had done a lot of work with cooperative development in Nicaragua that it was included there. It was about month 3 of the process when I realized that we didn't have the luxury of a year to study the problem. And I remember thinking, I think I went to Patrick and I was like, Patrick, you all will get your report, but this is not about a report. There's so much more opportunity and there's so much sense of urgency that we have to do something about it. And he's like, well, let's figure it out. So I was like, great, let's figure it out. I was like, you all will get your report, but there's so much more here. At that point, I started working with community members to try to figure out if cooperative development and if an employee ownership was really viable in the metro area. I will say that I talked to a funder at that time, and this funder said, oh, employee ownership doesn't actually work. And I was like, what do you mean it doesn't work? We have Namaste Solar Cooperative. We have examples of how it's worked before. And this entity that still to this day does not fund us say, oh, it only works for certain populations. And at that point, I realized that I needed to make sure that economic justice was rooted in the communities that were most impacted. Because our economic development model or system did not include people who looked like me, did not include people who worked very hard and still couldn't make ends meet. And so at that point, I remember walking out of there, recognizing that not only do we have to figure out economic opportunity, but we have to figure out economic opportunity in a system that has not only not included people, but intentionally excluded people of color. And so I was really intentional about actually getting to that next level and getting to the individuals that were not going to come to meetings because they were so busy doing the work. So I would go to the businesses and meet with business owners, and sometimes those would take 2 or 3 hours because they would talk to me and then go run their business and then come back and talk to me, and that was okay because I came from that background. That was the way I worked in Nicaragua with business owners. And so we ended up with a beautiful document that not only provided the framework for what became the Center for Community Wealth, but it also created an opportunity for business owners to be heard, for community members to be heard, and to know that we have an organization that will continue, that started rooted in community, thanks to the bold individuals who said, this is not the space for a consultant, an out-of-state consultant. This is the space for us to do the work. And so I think about that year as the critical work that needed to happen so that this became something that was actually changing lives, not just a glossy report that was going to end up in some shelf.
Right.
Now, has it been difficult? It's been so challenging. Another funder that does fund us said, wow, you all take the path of most resistance. And I said, yes, we did, because the path of least resistance has not worked for our communities. And if we continue to take that, we're going to continue in the same space 10 years from now. Now, I will say that I was very naive. When I came back, I remember telling you all, I'm going to do this, but this is going to be quick. We've got to figure it out. And so we had the year to try to figure out what it would become. And so it was at that moment that we recognized that while there was so much in economic opportunity that we could be doing, that we would focus on 3 strategies. First one is supporting our entrepreneurs, supporting businesses, especially the micro businesses, the 1 to 9 employee businesses, because we're working with individuals that are really self-employed employees. that are still working in their business and don't always have the time to work on their business. We knew that they needed access to markets. We knew that they needed support to strengthen their business. And that's what we heard loud and clear in that year of engagement. We also knew that we wanted to figure out the assets in our communities. And some of those assets include the hospitals, the universities, the way that our tax dollars are leveraged in our communities. And so we knew that that anchors would play a critical role in changing the system. Now, has it been easy? Absolutely not. Changing systems is even more difficult, but we know that it's worth pursuing. And we also learned from our community members very early on that there was actually interest in building something that was for the workers, by the workers. And so I knew that employee ownership was also, despite what some people believed, that it was actually feasible within our communities. I took it upon myself to figure out what it would take to build cooperatives in the US because I had done it in Nicaragua. I hadn't done it here. And I learned a lot from two cooperatives. Satya Yoga Cooperative and Mujeres Emprendedoras Cooperative were the first two that I started working with to learn together, to figure it out, and it was all this within the first year. And we learned a lot about the process. We learned about what works, and we learned about the gaps in the system. And so from there, we started figuring out the coalition that we would need to build to make sure that these systems could actually change eventually. I think that another thing that's worth mentioning is the not only the strategies of democratizing ownership, of strengthening opportunities for entrepreneurs and engaging in current institutions was pivotal to it, but it was also the approach. I knew that it came from a place of privilege to only focus on systems change when people needed to pay their bills at the end of the month. So we knew that we wanted to create something that provided the quick solutions while we're working towards that systems change. I also was very realistic that one entity cannot be the one to change everything. And so I was really intentional about creating an ecosystem approach and a coalition building approach because nothing happens in isolation. And ultimately our work is at the systems level. How do we change ordinance? How do we change policy? How do we change the laws so that eventually we don't have to exist, so that we can shift the focus to some other big problem? And so not an easy feat, but here we are.
Right.
And
Yes, we are.
You know,
When did we go from the network to the organization now?
Right.
We had you get a 501c3 and do
It's
all
a
that
long
work.
journey.
Yeah.
I also want to
How
say
did that happen?
well,
Yeah,
we
I can-
I
yeah.
want to say too that I think Yessica and I, we both were we went kicking and screaming into creating a new organization. That the hope was really there. So many nonprofits out there that let's not go create another organization, and can we find a good home and a good place that this work can continue? And we pretty much, we tried a few different things, but it was like, you know what, we're doing it so differently, and we are doing this really immediate, let's work with the business owner, let's work with co-op, people that are wanting to start co-ops, let's do some really tangible pieces, but this systems piece and this lens and this framework that guides our work is something that isn't happening and isn't being done, and we ended up having to create an organization, right? I mean, does that how
Yeah.
you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Michael's question, so even though the work had started during that year, we did wait for the report to come in at the end of the year, spring of 2018. And the conclusion of the report was, quite obvious. This needs to be institutionalized, not institutionalized, but it needs a structure around it. And so that is when the Denver Foundation was able to put some additional dollars on the table. Michelle was actually working as a consultant to the Denver Foundation to help put this all together, and basically became on loan to CCW as one of its first employees through that contract. And then the Carter Health Foundation, I think, was the next one that we reached out to. I remember going and meeting with some of their staff there to kind of pitch this, and we were able to get enough money for us to not have to say to Yessica, thank you for that report, good luck, and I hope everything works out for you.
Yeah.
We were able to say, now let's go. But in terms of the filing for C3 status and all that, we had a succession of fiscal sponsors for this very reason, that we didn't want to create another nonprofit. that was a hard lesson to learn, that sometimes it's better off to just control your own destiny, get in there, file your paperwork, and get off and running with your own board and your own fundraising structure, because working with a fiscal sponsor turns out to be pretty clunky, and we went through 3 of them in short order. And it drove nearly, I think Yessica worked for 8 months without pay at one point, because the way in which the money moved through through the fiscal sponsor was so messed up. And so thank God she stuck with it, because now we finally weren't able to pay her, and she was able to actually get her paycheck. And then the organization really started to take off. But we didn't file for the C3 until 2021, right?
Yes.
So 3 years in. And then when we got it, I think it was retroactive to 2020. So that's really when if you want to put a stake in the ground, when was CCW formed as a nonprofit institution? It was organization. It was in the July of 2020, I think, is what we point to.
Yeah, so we had from May of 2017 through August of 2018, where the report was created, delivered, and then we said there's something there. We didn't have that structure, and so between that and January 2nd of 2019, I now think back about my sweat equity years, the sweat equity months, and that was it. I mean, for one, it was my reputation. I went and talked to every single business owner, and I said, I'm actually listening. And so whether it was going to happen with a fiscal sponsor or without, the work was going to continue. And I delivered on that, and for most businesses or most of our constituents, there was no disruption. They went for like, we heard you, this is what we're doing about it, and we continue to work together. And then we found a fiscal sponsor that would support the work. And but at that point, it became clear that fiscal sponsors were either really comfortable with the direct service aspect of our work, but not with the advocacy of our work. No. Or they were very comfortable with the advocacy, but not with the direct service. And we knew that we wanted to do it all, because we know that policy is most effective when it's connected to those who are most impacted. So now we know that. I think at that point it felt very radical, but we started the process. I got my partner to take a leave of absence from his job to complete the entire application, and we were able to submit it, and we got our 501c3 in March, retroactively to March of 2021. So let's talk a little bit about the original board. The original design team was predominantly individuals that were really passionate about economic opportunity, but may not necessarily be the business owners, or weren't necessarily the people who had gone through this process with me to figure out what would become the Center for Community Wealth. And now let's talk about the first board that we had, because Patrick, you were on that board, and Michael, you were on that board. What did it feel like to go from organization-centric design team to an advisory board that included business owners, cooperative member, and you all?
Yeah, what was going through your mind?
On the board, first of all, I was very excited that this was happening, to be able to see all that work that had been done with the network and everything come to fruition, and to have you as the leader, it was just so very exciting to see things happening. And the structure that was built, the 3 anchors that we, not to use that group, but the 3 areas that community CCW was involved in, seemed to me just perfect. And it fit along with the things that I thought that the Office of Economic Development for the city should be doing. So very excited is all I can say about that. The board.
Yeah, and it really felt like we were walking our talk, because it had come out of this somewhat institutional setting with support from local funders and with folks from nonprofits involved in the network side of things. But then the grounding of the work in community is what Yessica really dug into in her year-long fellowship. So to see it then reemerge out of that work as a community-led organization, I was very proud and honored to just even have a seat at the table, to be able to say, I am so glad that this organization exists. I'm so glad that I had a role to play in helping to start it, and I'll continue to provide some historical perspective and to whatever guidance I can, but this is no longer about the institutions. This is about the communities that we're going to be working in. To see that board develop from that, and then to all of a sudden we were like, after all these years of, well, you're an advisory board because we're all are actually under the fiscal sponsorship of another group, and it's their board that technically and legally calls the shots, to guess what? We're going to become a C3 now, and you're going to be a real board. And now you're on the hook. And now you got to actually be the fiduciary for this organization. But to have had that come together, not in the way that a traditional board does, but through this community process, it left us in a position where the people who are supposed to be in charge were in charge. And that seemed like that was just exactly the right tone we needed.
Yeah, it was fascinating to go through the process and figure out, what does it mean? What is the vision for the organization now that we are officially working to create something that is probably more structured than probably what Michelle and I wanted, but we knew that it was time to do it. So our vision of self-determined communities rooted in economic democracy, dignity, and joy. When we think about the values guided of economic justice, solidarity, and sovereignty, those seem bold then, and they feel bold now, especially the joy. And a time when we are figuring out how to continue to work towards systems change, it's sometimes difficult to think about joy when there's so much happening. And yet we're doing it. We have to do it because at the end of the day, this work is difficult. And I'm more realistic now that we may not see this change in our lifetime, but we're going to continue to work towards that. Yeah. So what was that process like for you all as we were trying to define the vision, the values, and what we stand for?
Well, I remember being very grateful for the clarity that you brought to that work, and that what we landed on, though, was just absolutely in line with the feeling and the vision and the conversations that had been happening for a while before, but that clarity of, like, it's super clear, you all, it's businesses and it's co-ops and it's these anchor institutions, and it made it so much simpler to talk about to the rest of the community, right?
I really have to say, as a board member, this is one of the boards that I loved being on, but it couldn't have been as successful as it has been without you. I mean, you have been the driving force behind the vision, behind all the work that's done, and we wouldn't be where we're at without you, Yessica.
Thank you, Michael, and I stand on the shoulders of many giants who came before me, including you, who paved the way for me to be here. Full disclosure, Michael and I volunteered in many other areas together, so it's been quite the journey. Yeah. So as we think about economic justice, felt bold back then, and it perhaps feels even
more bold.
More now. What was it like to transition? Because it wasn't always easy. I remember going through the process of sharing with you all some of the comments that I would get as a woman of color, as somebody who is perceived as very young, in actually getting to some of the big barriers that we would eventually learn how to deal with, or maybe not so much how to deal with. But what was that process like from your perspective?
Good question.
that is a
Yeah.
good
I mean,
question.
I remember sorry, go ahead.
No.
I just remember some of the stories you would share with me about the reception that you received from people, and those were stories that you made them very real for me, right? In a way of, oh, this is a woman I'm working closely with and who I know, and she is facing some really pretty derogatory responses to you as a human being in this world. And so and the fact that we decided you are going to have to keep bringing those stories to our entire board and to the organization to help people recognize, no, this is real and this is happening right now today. And maybe some of us thought we had come a lot further than that as a society, right? And so it was a really huge, big wake-up call.
Well, when you think about economic justice and the work that we're doing, you can't get away from the fact that racism is a big part of the issues that we deal with day in and day out. And now, given the reality that we're in, I mean, it's slapping you in the face that the racism and economics, they go hand in hand. And that's one of the things that the center has to battle with,
Right.
racism. And Yessica brings it to the attention of the board. It even makes it more real how it impacts the work that we're trying to do.
And I remember one of the first things that we did, and I remember sitting in the conference room where we were doing it, was face that head on in a way that I think a lot of the folks who were part of that advisory board and the sort of emerging staff had not faced, in the sense of, as an organization, saying we have this huge mission that we have to accomplish in the community. It's so well documented from the work that you had done. And standing in the way of accomplishing that is not just the racism we're experiencing in the economic systems that we're trying to change, but our own lack of understanding of how to operate as an organization that is itself based on anti-racism and based on growing as an institution in ways that made sure that we were not that we were separating ourselves as firmly as we could from the racist environment in which we were operating. So we did this whole anti-racism training as an advisory board, and it was painful and it was long, and it was, is this the best use of our resources when there's so much work to do? And the answer was yes, it has to be, because if we don't have that structure internally, if we don't understand at the root level how we are organized as a nonprofit, and that we are an anti-racist organization, we're never going to be able to accomplish the goals that we want or overcome those barriers that you were experiencing and that all of the people that we were working with were experiencing, all the business owners and entrepreneurs. And it was deeply embedded in the anchor institutions, of course, that we were working with. So having the opportunity, as we became as we stood on our own 2 feet, to say one of the first things we have to do is go through this process of ourselves of becoming an anti-racist organization intentionally. I mean, again, Michael, to your point about the current environment, everyone is running away from that now. It's like you can't do it if you want to get funding from X group or Y group. The anchors are all dropping it out of their mission statements because they don't want to lose federal grants, et cetera. And it was such an important part of our founding to be anchored in that right at the beginning of our work.
Yeah, and it was so critical for me, for people of color, we experience this often, right? But to be able to bring it to a group and say, we need to make sure that whatever we end up creating does not continue to reflect these racist values, that we actually create something different. And one of the things that was really critical is listening to community. And I think that's something that I'm really proud that the center has continued to do. And so, one of the biggest examples is in 2022 when we had business owners who said, technical assistance is really helpful, but we are at the mercy of landlords. Whenever they decide to sell, we have to move our business, and moving a business a block away might as well move it half the world away, right? And so we started to think about, what does it mean to own real estate? What does it mean for our communities to own real estate? And Patrick, can you talk a little bit about the community-owned real estate strategy and how that came about?
That's sort of now the fourth pillar of our long-standing 3 pillars. It's the newest one that's emerged, and it really started developing in earnest in 2022. So as you said, so not that long ago. The idea that the Denver market, and as we talk to other community wealth building groups around the country, often they emerge out of very weak markets. The mortgage crisis led to the collapse of communities, hollowed out houses, whole blocks that were abandoned buildings, etc. Denver never experienced that to that degree. It was what they call a hot market. So the real estate values kept going up and up, and Denver has a lot of great neighborhoods that all of a sudden were targets as the economic boom continued in Denver. More and more people moving here from outside. They were the targets that the franchises wanted to come into, and that the Starbucks and the other places wanted to come into. And the real estate prices, as they still are in Denver, were going through the roof. And so the idea that one of the most successful, or one of the most important things that we could do to support the businesses that we were working with to help them to grow their business, increase their marketing, build their business fundamentals, et cetera, was to actually own and control real estate. Became absolutely clear as something that we had to do, that we had to start investing in and finding ways to help folks to develop. Now, the interesting thing about it is that, again, true to our mission, we rooted this not in outside investors coming in with sort of a charitable investment to help this poor business owner buy his or her business, but we came in with the notion that the community itself could own the real estate. And that community, of course, includes the business owner, but it includes people living in those neighborhoods. So what we're in the midst of right now, it's taken some time to get off the ground. Here we are 3.5 years into it. But what we're creating is an investment fund opportunity that local residents who support those businesses go to that hairdresser, go to get their hair cut there, buy from that local food restaurant, go to that bodega or that supermarket that carries the types of foods that are critical to their culture, that they can say, I want to own a piece of that as well. And so the idea of the community-owned and benefiting real estate project is that we will have the opportunity to bring resources from the community into the ownership of real estate, commercial real estate in those communities, that allows those businesses that are critical to the cultural heritage of those communities, to the lifeblood of the economy of those communities, to remain in place because they own the real estate. They can't get driven out by a landlord who's waiting for Starbucks to buy their spot if they own the building itself. And so that's really the idea, and it really fits so well with the larger community wealth building work that we've been doing for the last 8 years, because it gives us a place to say, a neighborhood, a community builds wealth by owning the real estate that's in. Think about the ways in which people around this country in particular have grown wealth over the years. It's through owning homes. It's home ownership. It's real estate investment. It's being able to see the appreciation of property over time. Our communities were missing out on that entirely. And so I think we have a tool now to help address some of that and build wealth through real estate instead of just through, not just, but through earnings from your business itself. Now you own the real estate your business is located in. You have that as a wealth building as well as an income generation opportunity.
And Michelle, what role can anchors play in that?
Thank you for that question, Jessica. So anchor institutions, we have 3 pillars that we work with anchor institutions, and their procurement and their human resource practices, and then their investment assets. And so a lot of times, philanthropy will talk about investments, and they're still talking about grants. What we're talking about is taking some of their investment assets, moving that out of Wall Street, and bringing that capital that wealth came out of this community where they're located in, and it's now making money for people all over the world, right? About bringing that money back into Denver, back into the metro area, and investing in these real estate funds, also investing in financing for affordable housing, as well as small businesses. And so there's a real opportunity that our anchor institutions are recognizing that the health of their institutions is really tied to the health of the community that they're in, and recognizing that their missions to serve the community can be amplified so much more if they bring some capital in to help with wealth generation in this community. So it's a real clear, easy line for anchors to get involved in that work.
And it just makes sense, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, as we're thinking about the core of what we started with, community wealth, when we think about the roles that these institutions have, the businesses, the consumers, we have all that we need if we can just structure it in a way that makes sense for our communities. And so
we mentioned this group earlier, the Democracy Collaborative. They have this term that says, a community that's building wealth is a generative community. It has a generative economy. most of our communities, especially our black and brown communities, our low-income communities, have what's called an extractive economy, where the money that people spend on things that they need every day leaves the community because it's being spent in large chains. It's being spent in places that have shareholders that they're responsible to. So the whole notion of community wealth building is to ensure that that community can generate its own economic wealth and opportunity by circulating dollars and resources from within that community to the local businesses and the local establishments that can keep that money, because every time you pay that local business and they pay their employee who lives in your neighborhood, that money stays in your neighborhood. It doesn't get leave to go to an external shareholder. So that's so important to this notion of how do we build wealth in communities.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm so excited about the Collective Economics Innovation Hub. So Patrick, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. So this is our opportunity to walk our walk in the community-owned and benefiting real estate system. We have the chance right now to purchase a commercial building, a commercial unit in a affordable condominium project in Denver's Five Points community along the Welton Corridor, and to make that our home and the home for the businesses that we work with. We have spent the last 2 years, year and a half, working to develop a plan for that space. It's a space that's been made available to us as the commercial tenant or the commercial owner just as the building's coming online. It's about to get its certificate of occupancy probably in the next 2 months. And we have the opportunity to buy the ground floor commercial unit to sit right at the base of this wonderful new community asset called the Hattie McDaniel, which is the name of the condominium building, and to anchor that project, that wonderful affordable housing project, with our small business and entrepreneurship and community and collective ownership model, as well as having it become our own office space that where we will have a permanent home. So we are raising money right now. We're looking at different opportunities to be able to purchase and outfit that space. We went through a whole process this past summer to design that space with the businesses that we work with every day and our own staff. And so we designed what this is going to look like. They designed what they wanted to see in this, how it could be a place of welcome, a place where they could have the resources they needed to grow and build their businesses, a place where they could practice collective economics, as the name of the hub suggests, that they can learn from one another, they can depend on one another, they can build networks together, and they can market their goods together, learn how to market them more effectively, and to grow their businesses while growing and building the wealth of the entire community that they're part of. So we are so thrilled to have this opportunity to create the Collective Economics Innovation Hub at 29th and Welton. Plans are actively underway right now, and we're gonna be part of that system that builds wealth through property ownership, because we're gonna have that thing that can't be taken away from us to continue doing this work into the future.
And what's most exciting is that we've been able to do this with our communities, with business owners. And so one of the things that feels so amazing is to be able to have that ownership, so that the Center for Community Wealth can be in community, for community, by community for the next 100 years. So pretty exciting. As we think about the future for CCW, what comes up for you all? I know that soon 3 retired individuals will be continuing to guide the work. But yeah, what comes up for you? What gives you hope right now? I know it's hard.
It's a hard time. One of the things that the work that I mostly focused on when I was at the center was with our anchor institutions, engaging our anchor institutions. And so we've been building relationships for quite some time now. And in the summer of 2020, we hit a crisis with the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. And there was with the pandemic, it was a clear disparate impact, right, on communities of color. And then George Floyd right on top of that. And our anchor institutions, because at that time we were early in our relationship with them, but we did have a relationship of trust with them. And we were able to make some advances with our work because of that, and the clear sense of the things that we had been talking to about them. They're seeing it play out in the news, right? And so it was more of an impetus for them to get involved. And I would say where we are now, similarly, it is as you mentioned, Patrick, that DEI programs are being canceled, and there are many things that can't be talked about now in official circles. And so the fact, though, that we have relationships and our focus is on local economy, that we are able to continue to do that work, and I think that we're in a better place because of the work that we've been doing in this community. I think we are in a better place than we would have been in this moment of history if we had not been starting this work before we got to this crisis mode in our country. So I think I'll stop there.
I think in the short-term future, I'm just thinking of survival. A few more years of this, we have to figure out a way to survive it. For the long-term future is we're going to have an impact. We're going to make a change. Yeah. It's small, but we can do it.
Yeah. Systems change takes time, right? It's how do we figure out how we maximize this time and the disruption that's happening so that we're building something that actually works for our community. And so I think to the hope, to the resilience, and really the solidarity economy is giving so much, there's so much more power now when we think about the global movements that are happening to create a more just and sustainable economy. Perhaps this is what we need to prioritize people, because if it's not, if it wasn't clear before that our system was only for profit, I think it's pretty clear now. And so how do we create that to provide alternatives to extractive capitalism that has actually just hurt our community so much? So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can create participatory democracy. I'm hopeful that we can create more cooperative and public ownership of our spaces, because at the end of the day, it's about the culture of solidarity, of respect, not just for our communities, but for each other and for our earth. So there's so much that we have to go through, but I think there's so much opportunity. As we think about so many other places, I had the honor of taking a sabbatical this year, and I made the choice of visiting Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico. 3 of those countries have gone through very difficult political climate, and I've been really hopeful that they got through it. And so continuing to stay focused and learning from other solidarity movements and what has come out of that gives me a lot of hope for this. So any last minute comments?
I didn't answer the question about what gives hope for the future, and because it is a hard time to think about that. But it seems like King's adage or statement that the arc of the moral universe is long but bends towards justice, that's always been our touchstone on sort of in our world, that we will make progress towards justice over time. But I think what we're realizing right now is that arc is in fact long. He said that very pointedly. We're seeing it bend a little bit back the other way, but it's a long arc. And I do think that what we're putting in place, to Michelle's point, is a system or the potential for systems change that can be realized towards economic justice. And especially if we think about the way things are happening at the local level, because right now it seems like it's bending away on the federal level. But we have a very strong worker ownership culture here in Colorado that, of course, Yessica, you're on the commission that oversees that work and helps to promote it in Colorado. And there's a lot of energy around this. And there is this notion of the new economy, the solidarity economy, which is both located very strongly in communities and in local communities and states, but is not so much influenced by what's happening at the federal level, because people are realizing that they have control of what happens in their own communities, even if that means they don't get federal funding. And so that notion of coming together to help in that long-term arc of the moral universe moving towards justice, I think that's what gives me hope. As someone, closer to the end of my career than the beginning, I do see that as a hopeful sign, as a way to go forward. And I'm so glad that you're all, that you and especially Yessica as a young leader, are here to show us the way.
Thank you for that. I think one of the things that's really critical is, and why we have this show, the wealth we build. The wealth we build. We as community, we as individuals, because we know that we're not going to stop and wait until somebody comes to save us. So we are doing it ourselves, and we are creating economic opportunity every single day. And so taking ownership of our own destiny and taking action, as difficult as it is, as long as it takes, I think is what gives me hope that we're going to be able to do it. And it's painful right now, but we're going to continue to find the joy, and we're going to continue to work towards something much greater, so that at the end of the day, we can all be here. So thank you all so much. Michelle, truly appreciate you for all the work that you've done, all of the investment, leading all of the Anchor institution work. Truly appreciate it. Patrick, thank you for believing in this so many years ago and continuing to stay at it. There's so much that we have to be grateful for, so thank you for that. And Michael, thank you so much. Thank you for not only believing in me for over 2 decades, but for continuing to put in the work. And I hope that we can make you proud. And with that, thank you all for tuning in today. For more information on Center for Community Wealth, please visit our website, communitywealth.org, or find us on social media, CCW Denver on Instagram and Facebook, and CCWB on LinkedIn. Thank you.